Shabbos Machita, Boi Beshalom Teres Bana, Gam Besimcha Utzahara, Toi Chemune Am Seguda, Toi Chemune Am Seguda, Boi Beshalom Teres Bana, Gam Besimcha Utzahara, Toi Chemune Am Seguda, Toi Chemune Am Seguda, V'imai, Bai Chala, Bai Chala, Bai Chala.
The continuation of the song we were playing at the beginning of yesterday's show, Boi B'Shalom from Lechado D from the Friday night praying that we do, and God willing we'll be doing tonight. How's everybody doing? A Guten Erev Shabbos to you. Let's light up the darkness. Who's with us on a Friday? Gosh, Shabbos can't get here soon enough. We've got Bill in Mid-Missouri, Yehud in South Carolina, Dorothy in Atlanta, Guy in Ohio, Bella in Florida, and Sharon Frant Brooks in Lebanon, New Jersey, and Paul in Chicago, Gordo in Scotland, it must be Friday, Hannah in New York, Belle in North Texas. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you with us. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our very own Sharon Frant Brooks and her husband Ken in honor of Sal and Nina Litvak and the pursuit of Jewish learning, which I take to mean Sharon's dedicating this class to everybody that learns with us every day. Sharon, may you and Ken and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, even more than your ample imagination could conceive. And we say amen. And thank you for enabling us all to share more Torah with more people around the world. We are on page 17 here of Tractate Yevamos, and that means we're going to finish the chapter. We're going to finish chapter 1 today with God's help and open chapter 2. So this whole chapter had 2 Mishnas, and we've been discussing how if a woman comes up for Yibum as a widow of a man who died childless, and she stands for Yibum before her brother-in-law, the surviving brother, if she has some other kind of familial relationship with that brother that precludes them from getting married, so then we don't override the prohibition of being with your brother's wife. That is normally overridden, right? So if the only prohibition between this widow and the surviving brother is that she is the brother's wife, we override that for Yibum or perform chalitza in the alternative. But if she has some other relationship, like she's his daughter or some other prohibited relationship, then she's exempt from Yibum and Chalitza, and so is her co-wife, even though the co-wife doesn't have such a prohibition within her relationship to the brother-in-law. Beis Shammai disagreed with that. So according to Beis Shammai, the co-wife is still obligated, and we saw the problems that caused because Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai impose different obligations on that co-wife. Beis Hillel says she's exempt, just like the wife that has the additional prohibition, and therefore she's free to go marry whoever she wants. And if she should instead marry the brother who's prohibited to her, that would be violating a prohibition with a chorus penalty. And some would say that creates a mamzer. Others don't go that far. Beis Shammai say the co-wife is obligated, and if she goes and marries someone else without performing chalitza, then she has violated a prohibition. So it was a difficult state of affairs among the Jewish people until it was well established that the law follows Beis Hillel. Even when the people who followed Beis Shammai were doing so, they would notify people who were, according to Beis Hillel, so that they wouldn't marry into a family that, according to the law, as their community understood it, would be prohibited. And then yesterday we had this fascinating teaching about Dosa ben Harkness and his brother Yonasan. Dosa, a great and kind sage who transmitted to the next generation that yes, the law follows Beis Hillel, but my brother, my crazy brother, who's not crazy at all, he's just very, very smart and enthralled by his own intelligence. And because he feels that Beis Shammai has the right ruling, he's telling everybody that the law is according to Beis Shammai, even though that's not true. That would lead to factionalizing Israel. It's a big problem. And that's why Dosa ben Harkness referred to his own brother, Yonasan ben Harkness, as Satan's firstborn. And then we saw that teaching that I just brought to the class from Pirkei Avos, famous teaching of Hanina ben Dosa, the son of Dosa, that one whose fear of sin precedes his wisdom, that person's wisdom will endure. But one whose wisdom precedes his fear of sin, that person's wisdom will not endure. All right, we pick it up on 17a, about halfway down. Our daf today is page 17, and we're finishing chapter 1. So the Gemara relates that Rav Yosef sat behind Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana sat before Rav Yehuda. So in Talmudic times, when you had the study hall, if there was a great sage who was teaching others, so then his colleagues, the other great sages or the greatest of his students, would sit in the front row, and then lesser students would sit further and further back. It was an absolute meritocracy. And there were no participation trophies in the Beis Midrash, in the study hall of the scholars. Everyone was ranked according to their acumen, and the sharper scholar you were, the closer to the front of the room you sat. Why? Because then the teacher would have the highest level discussion with the people sitting in front of him, and the other ones in back would struggle to keep up. Not the way we handle education these days, but that's the way that it was done then. So, Rav Kahana, we're being told Rav Yosef sat behind Rav Kahana, so Rav Kahana was older, wiser, more educated, somehow ahead of Rav Yosef. And Rav Kahana sat before their teacher, Rav Yehuda. And he sat and he said this tradition: in the future, the Jews will establish a festival day when Tarmod is destroyed. What is Tarmod? Wait a minute. Establish a festival day when Tarmod is destroyed. Rashi says that this is due to the disqualification of Mamzerim, right? So that there were sort of Jews who had intermarried with the people of Tarmod. And so there was a possibility that mamzers were there, and when they wanted to convert into the Jewish people, they were bringing mamzers with them, and that was a problem. And also, we have this issue that the people of Tarmod hated the Jews, right? So some Jews might have ended up living there because Jewish women were raped and their children were raised there. Or people alienated from the Jewish people might have moved to live among the absolute enemies of the Jewish people. But the inhabitants of Tarmod participated in the destruction of the first and second temples in Jerusalem. They couldn't wait to get in there and destroy what was holy in Israel. So, in the future, the Jews will establish a festival day when Tarmod is destroyed. And the Gemara asks, but it has already been destroyed. And the Gemara answers, that place that was destroyed was not Tarmod, but Talmud, not Tarmod. Rav Ashi said Tarmod is the same as Talmud. However, the city is doubled. In other words, when it is destroyed from this side, it is settled on that side. And when it is destroyed from that side, it is settled on this side. So this place that houses so many bitter enemies of the Jewish people, never got destroyed, and so they still live there hating the Jewish people. And the Gemara relates, Rav Hamnuna sat before Ula. Ula was that sage famous for sort of commuting between the sages in the land of Israel under Roman occupation and the sages who were much more free to teach and learn Torah in Bavel, in Babylonia, which by then was part of the Persian Empire. So Rav Hamnuna sat before Ula and was engaged in the study of halacha, law. Ula said about him, what a man, what a man. In other words, what a great man this Rav Hamnuna is. What a great Torah scholar. If only Harpanya were not his city, as the inhabitants of that place are all of flawed lineage, which indicates that the lineage of Rav Hamnuna is likewise impaired. Rav Hamnuna was ashamed. Ula said to him, where do you give the money for payment of the poll tax? He said to him, I pay it to the city of Pumnahara, as my city is subject to taxation by that city. Ula said to him, if so, you are from Pumnahara, not Harpanya, and your lineage is evidently not flawed. We see at several places in the Talmud that Ula can be a little bit brusque of speech. Here, he violates, you don't embarrass any person, right? Also, we have the teaching that it would be better to jump in a fiery furnace, in other words, to commit suicide, than to humiliate another person publicly. So maybe Rav Hamnuna and Ula were studying just alone together, but if they were learning together in front of other students, then this would have been a really embarrassing moment for Rav Hamnuna. At any rate, Ula found an out for him from this assumption that people from a certain city, Harpanya, all have flawed lineage. And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the name Harpanya? And Rabbi Zera said it means the mountain to which all turn. Har Shakol Ponin Bo, the mountain to which all people turn. In other words, it is the destination for all those who could not find wives anywhere else, as most of its population is of flawed lineage. And it is taught in a Baraisa, all those who do not know their family or tribe turn there. And Rava said this type of flaw is appalling and is deeper than the netherworld. As it is stated, shall I ransom them from death? Hosea 13:14. And this verse indicates that it is possible to be ransomed and released from the netherworld, whereas their disqualification, having this kind of flawed lineage, as all the residents of Harpanya are assumed to have, that cannot be rectified. And the Gemara comments, those who are disqualified from Harpanya are unfit due to the disqualification of the inhabitants of nearby Meishon, who were unfit and intermarried with the residents of Harpanya. And those disqualified from Meishon are unfit due to those disqualified from Tarmod. And those disqualified from Tarmod are disqualified due to the servants of Solomon. In all these cases, situations where a bunch of Jews assimilated and it wasn't clear who was Jewish, who was not, who married or had sexual affairs. There was problems where people from that community did not have, sort of clean lineage. And so they would certainly be precluded, even if they were Kohanim, from serving as priests in the temple. And the Gemara comments, and this explains the folk saying that people say in this regard, a large ephah and a small ephah, that's a measurement of volume, which are both inaccurate utensils that may not be used for measuring. A large ephah and a small ephah roll onward to the netherworld, and from the netherworld to Tarmod, and from Tarmod to Meishon, and from Meishon to Harpanya. The same idea expressed by the sages with regard to the disqualification of lineage was also incorporated into a well-known adage among commoners. And this idea of a large ephah and a small ephah. The Torah says you shall not have a large measure and a small measure, meaning if you're in business and you're a merchant and you weigh produce, to sell to people, you're not going to have two different weights depending on whether you're selling to somebody that you like or somebody who could catch you and accuse you of doing wrong, and a different measure for, when you're stealing from people, right? That in other words, if you don't have standardized measures, it's because you're trying to steal from people, and you better not do that. So this idea that people who would behave that way is connected to these cities where people have the residents of those cities have very unsavory reputation. And that concludes chapter 1 here in Tractate Yevamos. Now we go to chapter 2. And I'll just read a quick, the first paragraph of Rav Steinsaltz's introduction. In the first chapter, the Gemara discussed women who are prohibited from entering into Yibum due to their being close relatives of and therefore severely forbidden to their Yavam, right, the surviving brother-in-law, together with the rival wives of such women. And it was explained that these women are exempt from both Yibum and Chalitza. However, there are other problems that can arise in cases of Yibum. Some women are not forbidden to their Yavam with a prohibition of Karas, but are forbidden due to another prohibition or by rabbinic law. In these instances, does the mitzvah of Yibum override the prohibition? In this chapter, we'll also find that, okay, so the surviving brother, has to perform Yibum with the widow, with the Yevama. Well, what if he's only a half-brother? Does it matter? What if he's a maternal half-brother versus a paternal half-brother? What if he's a half-brother and he's an illegitimate half-brother, right? He's a mamzer. Does he perform Yibum, right? Questions like that are going to come up in this chapter, as well as, the unexpected digressions, like always. So we're near the bottom of 17a and the first Mishnah of chapter 2. Each of the women enumerated in the first chapter causes exemption from Yibum and Chalitza for her co-wives. And this is due to the close family relationship that she has with her brother-in-law, making her forbidden to him, and therefore the co-wife as well. Now, the single exception is the case that was explained in this Mishnah. What is the case of the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist? Right? So there were two parents, and they had a son, and that son married a woman. And then before he had any kids, this son died. The parents went and had another child, right? So this baby was born after the older brother died. When this baby boy, grows up to be an adult, is he obligated in Yibum toward the surviving that widow that survived his older brother, whom he never knew? No, because the baby boy and his older brother never coexisted. They were never alive at the same time. Now, if he was a baby boy who was born before his older brother died, then eventually he would come up for Yibum, even though he was only like a year old or 2 years old when his older brother died. They coexisted. Now, that Yavama might have to wait until this boy is old enough to perform Yibum with her, but that was the situation in the Judah and Tamar story with the third brother after the first two brothers married Tamar and died. So, the single exception is the case explained in this Mishnah. What is the case of the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist? For example, if there were two brothers, and one of them died childless, and subsequently a brother of theirs was born, right? So the baby brother was born after the oldest brother died, after which the second brother, right, the middle brother, took his deceased brother's wife in Yibum, and then he died as well. So this woman would have come up for Yibum with the second brother, and then he died as well. Now, does she come up for Yibum with the third brother? Now, the third brother never coexisted with the first brother, but now she's also become the wife of the second brother. So does she also come for Yibum to the third brother now? Consequently, So for example, if there were two brothers and one of them died childless, and subsequently a brother of theirs was born, after which the second brother, the middle brother, took his deceased brother's wife in Yibum, and then he died as well. Consequently, two women require... Oh, and the second brother had a wife at the time that he then married the first brother's wife. So consequently, two women require Yibum. The widow of the first brother, who had been taken in Yibum by the second brother, and the widow of the second brother, the first widow's co-wife. Now, the first widow, who had been the wife of the first brother to die, goes out without any obligation to be taken in Yibum by the youngest brother, who was born later, since she is the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. The first deceased brother never lived at the same time as the newly born brother, and the second widow, who had been married to the second brother, now is exempt with regard to Yibum and Chalitza vis-a-vis the third brother. Why? Because when the middle brother married took in Yibum, the widow of the first brother, she became the co-wife of, the second brother's existing wife. And since she is exempt for Yibum to the baby brother, the co-wife is exempt as well. And the Mishnah discusses an additional situation. If the second brother had performed only levirate betrothal, he didn't take the middle brother didn't take the widow, his Yevama, in Yibum. They didn't have marital relations. They didn't marry. He agreed to marry her. They became engaged, but they never completed that. They never consummated it. So if the second brother had performed only levirate betrothal with her, meaning that he had not yet consummated the marriage, and then he died, so both the wife betrothed by levirate betrothal to the second brother and the wife of the second brother fall before the youngest brother after the death of the first brother. In that case, the first wife certainly goes out and is exempt from chalitza and yibum, since she is to him the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. The second wife, however, was never effectively the co-wife of the first brother's wife, right? Because when the first brother came for Yibum to the middle brother, he didn't marry her. He just got engaged with her. So there was some kind of a bond there, but they didn't consummate it. So she didn't become a full co-wife to the second brother's existing wife. Then the second brother died. So she's not, the co-wife is not exempt by the fact that the original widow is exempt from Yibum with the third brother, the baby brother, but nor can she perform Yibum because there was some kind of a bond. Therefore, she must perform chalitza. Therefore, she performs chalitza and may not enter into Yibum. Now, the Gemara on this Mishnah. Rav Nachman said, he who taught the version of the Mishnah which reads, the first widow goes out, is not mistaken in his version. And he who taught a variant version of the Mishnah which reads, the second widow goes out, is not mistaken either, since it is possible to understand the Mishnah both ways. Both versions of the text can refer to the same woman, i.e. the wife of the first brother, and we can call her by different titles. And the Gemara explains that he who taught the first widow is not mistaken as, what is the meaning of first? It means the first to fall before her yavam for Yibum. Right, the widow of the first brother. And he who taught referring to her, that same woman, as the second widow, this is also not a mistake, as what is the meaning of second in this situation? It means second to enter marriage. Since the second deceased brother, the middle brother, was already married to one woman, this Yevama, this widow of the oldest brother, whom he took in Yibum, became his second wife. And the Gemara wonders, is this the necessary order of events? Are we not also dealing with a scenario in which the second brother took the wife of the first brother in Yibum, and then later he married another woman? And she was the second wife to the second brother. Would such a situation not merit the same ruling? Rather, what is the meaning of calling the wife of the first brother the second? Why would we call her that? It means she who had been married for a second time. She had already been married twice, once to the oldest brother, then to the middle brother, before she comes up before the third brother for Yibum. We're on 17b now. And the Gemara turns from a review of the language used in the Mishnah to a discussion of the law of a wife of a brother with whom one did not coexist. That's the issue we're examining now. Where is it written that the mitzvah of Yibum does not apply in the case of the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist? We've been taking it as a given because the Mishnah said so, that this baby brother who was born after his oldest brother dies, he's not in a Yibum situation. How do we know that? And we learned that in chapter 1, that part of the law of Yibum is when brothers dwell together and one of them dies. These brothers never dwelled together because the oldest died before the youngest was born. Right? And here we hear that same teaching. Where is it written that the mitzvah of Yibum does not apply in the case of the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist? Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, the verse states, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies. Deuteronomy 25:5. meaning that they had a common dwelling together in the world. And this excludes the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. Furthermore, it is derived together, means that they were united, right? The fact that they dwell together. The word together is actually adding an additional meaning. It could have just said if brothers dwell. But it says brothers dwell together. What are we to learn from this word together? Together means that they were united together in an inheritance, i.e., they are united in that they inherit together. In other words, since property is inherited by Torah law in the ancient world from sons from their father, right? It's a patriarchal system, and you inherit from your father. So since property is inherited by sons from their father, it can be inferred that the verse is speaking specifically of brothers from the same father. And this excludes his maternal half-brother, with whom he is not united by inheritance. If two brothers share a mother, they're half-brothers, but he doesn't inherit, they don't inherit together because they don't inherit from the mother, they inherit from their fathers, and they're not obligated in Yibum. Only a brother who is a full brother or a paternal half-brother steps in for Yibum when his brother dies childless. Rabbah said, one learns the ruling that Yibum applies only to brothers from the same father, from the verbal analogy between the term brotherhood used in the context of Yibum and the term brotherhood from the children of Jacob, right? The 12 tribes of Israel are the descendants of the 12 sons of Jacob. They were mostly paternal half-brothers, right? 6 of them were the sons of Leah, but 2 of them were the sons of Rachel, 2 of them were the sons of Bina, and 2 of them were the sons of, I think her name was Zilpah, right? Only, the 6 who were all Leah's kids, they were all full brothers of each other. For all of them, their father was Jacob, their mother was Leah. But vis-a-vis the other 6 brothers, they were only half brothers because those were all sons of Jacob, but their mother was either Rachel or Bina or Zilpah, etc. Bilhah or Zilpah, right? Were those names Bilhah and Zilpah? Where am I? So right, Rabbah learned from the children of Jacob. So just as there, with regard to the children of Jacob, they are all brothers from the father and not from the mother, since they are from 4 different mothers, so too here, in the case of Yibum, it is referring specifically to brothers from the father and not necessarily from the mother, okay? Right, and so Bel is raising up the issue of inheritance, the daughters of Zelophehad, right? So that was a really interesting issue that happens in the Torah in the wilderness, where there were 5 daughters of a man named Zelophehad. And there were no sons. So they came to Moses and they said, well, when we get to the promised land, you're going to distribute, portions of land according to families, meaning that men are going to be assigned those portions. Women go and marry those men, and that's where they live. But this man who would have been given a portion of land to pass on to his sons, he only has daughters. So are we going to inherit his land or not? Right? And Moses said, I don't know. Moses asked God. God said, the daughters of Zelophehad have asked correctly. Great question. And the answer is they inherit. Right? So it's a patriarchal system, but in the absence of a brother, the women will inherit. Nevertheless, since the laws are keyed to inheritance from the father, for the purposes of Yibum, whether a brother steps in, because the whole point of Yibum is that this man who died childless, but he had a brother, the brother steps in, performs Yibum with the widow, and the child born of that union will inherit the father. That's why inheritance is so important here, that man didn't have children, but now this child of the Yibum will count as his child and will inherit the land that he possessed. And in this tribal patriarchal system where land was associated with the tribes, they wanted to be able to pass down land in the tribal portions from father to son. Okay, so the Gemara now raises an objection to this idea that we're going to learn out that the term brothers in Yibum means full brothers or paternal half-brothers, but to the exclusion of maternal half-brothers, and that we learn that from the fact that all the sons of Jacob were called brothers, even though many of them were half-brothers. So the Gemara raises an objection. Why should we learn from the children of Jacob? Let's learn it from somewhere else in the Torah. Let it derive the meaning of the term brotherhood by verbal analogy to the term brotherhood from the verses discussing those with whom relations are forbidden. Since we've already been talking about prohibited relationships, so in Leviticus, right, chapter 18, it lists all these people that you cannot marry and you cannot have sex with. For example, your brother's wife or your father's brother's wife, I guess, right? Or, brothers are mentioned in all these different places. So how do we define it in the terms of prohibited relationships? Maybe that's how we should define it here for Yibum. In the laws of forbidden relations, both paternal and maternal half-brothers are considered brothers and are thereby subject to such prohibitions like those against being with your brother's wife, right? You can't, like in terms of your maternal half-brother, right? Like the relationship between Judah, no, they all had the same father. But at any rate, if, there's a woman who had two different marriages, and so she had a son from each of the two husbands. So they are maternal half-brothers to each other. If one of them gets married and then he dies, so first of all, Yibum doesn't apply according to this. But let's say he married and he had children and then he died. So for sure, Yibum doesn't apply. So then, is the surviving brother permitted to marry that widow? No, because they're brothers. But you could say, no, but we've only said that we learned from the children of Jacob that only that the maternal half-brothers are not called brothers. Only paternal half-brothers are called brothers. Full brothers or paternal half-brothers. No, but for the laws of prohibited relationships, maternal half-brothers are included. And this man, whose maternal half-brother died and left a widow, he can never marry that widow because she is his brother's wife. So in the laws of forbidden relations, both paternal and maternal half-brothers are considered brothers and are thereby subject to such prohibitions as those against relations with the brother's wife. And the Gemara answers the first analogy from Jacob's sons, which says that paternal half-brothers is what we mean when we say brothers, is preferable. That analogy is preferable as we infer brothers from brothers. The word brothers, plural, is stated both with regard to the children of Jacob and with regard to the laws of Yibum. Whereas with regard to the laws of forbidden relationships, it never says brothers, it says your brother. You cannot take the wife of your brother, for example. One cannot make an inference regarding brothers, achim, brothers brothers, from another verse which uses the word achicha, your brother, not brothers, achim, right? Similar word, but not the same. So the Gemara objects. What difference does it make if there's a minor difference between the syntax or grammar of the words that are being compared? As the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, a verbal analogy with regard to tzara'as of houses, right? This condition that appears in the walls of houses between the verse and the priest shall return, veshav, the priest shall return, and the verse and the priest shall come, uva, from which it is derived that the law with regard to returning, i.e. after 7 days, and this is the same law with regard to coming, that is after 7 days. So even though the verb is not the same, one says return, the other one says come, still it's similar enough that we can learn that the priest returns after 7 days in both cases. So if we can learn out a law from a similar word that's not identical, why can't we learn out a law from the use of brothers, your brother in one situation and the plural brothers in another? It's not exactly the same, but since we learned, we can learn a law from analogous cases without the identical word. In the case of the tzara'as of houses, why can't we do that here? And the Gemara responds, this applies when nothing else was more similar. But where we have a choice between learning out the law from a situation where it's the identical word versus learning out the law from a place where the word is similar but not identical, we'll take the identical case. The Gemara objects for a different reason. Let the law derive the meaning of the term brotherhood from the term brotherhood from Lot, right? Abraham's nephew, Lot, the one that Abraham negotiated with God to save Lot from Sodom and Gomorrah after God decided that the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah is too great and I'm going to destroy it, right? So they're going to save Lot because of the merit of Abraham. So where does the word brothers have to do with Lot? Lot was Abraham's nephew. So let the law derive the meaning of the term brotherhood from the term brotherhood from Lot, as it is written that Abraham said to Lot, "For we are brothers." And he's not. Lot is Abraham's nephew, but Abraham said to Lot, "We are brothers." So brothers here must mean we're related. Like we're cousins, or you're my nephew, we're part of the same family. So we are brothers doesn't specifically mean that we share a mother or a father or a mother and a father. For we are brothers. Now from here, one could conclude that the word brothers just means relatives and not necessarily brothers. And the Gemara rejects this. It is more reasonable to derive from the children of Jacob due to the fact that the word brothers is free in its context and is therefore available to be used in a verbal analogy. Since it could have written, when the brothers are talking to Joseph when they don't know that he's their brother Joseph, he's the second in command of Egypt, and there's a famine and they've gone there to get food in Egypt. And so they say to him, not knowing he's their brother, that we are brothers, right? They could have said, since it could have written, we, your servants, are 12 children of our father. But it didn't say that. It said, we are 12 brothers, the children of one man, right? So many of them are only half brothers, but they use the word brothers. And so that's why the Torah is going to learn out, the sages are going to learn out, that when we're deriving laws, brothers means paternal brothers. So learn from here that it comes to render the word brothers free so that it can be allocated to another matter, i.e. the definition of brothers. They didn't need to use the word brother in that situation. They could have just said, we are 12 children of the same father. But they said, we are brothers, 12 children of the same father. Why was it written that way in the Torah? To teach us that paternal half-brothers are called brothers. Why do we need to know that? So we know how to apply the law of Yibum. Now the Gemara comments, and although Rav Yehuda and Rabbah learned the same ruling from two different passages, according to both, it was necessary to write brothers and it was necessary to write together in the verses discussing Yibum. As if the Merciful One had written only brothers, I would say that one should infer the meaning of the term brothers from the term brothers from the story of Lot. And if you would say it is not free there in the same way that the word brothers is free in the passage concerning the children of Jacob, but this is not so, you'd be wrong. In fact, it is free. With regard to Lot, it could have written friends, as they were not actually brothers but relatives, and yet brothers was written. And one might learn from here that this is free to be allocated elsewhere and teach that such relatives are called brothers even for Yibum. Therefore, the Torah wrote together to teach that this applies specifically to those brothers who are united in an inheritance, right? The law of Yibum says when brothers dwell together and one of them dies, the surviving brother shall marry the widow, etc. And so the word brothers and the word together needed to be written there so that you would know this is talking about a full brother or a paternal half-brother who were alive at the same time. And if the Merciful One had written together alone and not added brothers, I would say that they must have both the same father and mother together, that they must be full brothers. and that otherwise the mitzvah of levirate marriage would not apply. Therefore, brothers is written to compare this to the children of Jacob, who were brothers from the same father, therefore united in inheritance, but not the same mother. And it is for this reason then that it is necessary to write both these terms. And the Gemara asks about the last supposition. From where would it be derived that perhaps Yibum would apply only if they are full brothers, sharing both a father and a mother? Why would I ever think that? Why should one assume that maternal brotherhood is also of importance here? Doesn't God make Yibum dependent upon inheritance? The purpose of Yibum is so that the brother who died without having an heir should have an heir. So it's all about inheritance. The Torah states that the Yavam who performs Yibum will establish the name of his deceased brother, meaning he inherits from him, and inheritance comes from the father and not from the mother. Nevertheless, this was necessary, as it could enter your mind to say that since this law of Yibum is a novelty in that a woman who was a forbidden relation to him as a brother's wife is now rendered permitted, we'll say that this permissibility will be limited only to cases of brothers with the same father and the same mother together. It is due to this possibility that you might have thought that the verbal analogy to the brothers who were the children of Jacob is necessary, right? To teach you that for purposes of Yibum, full brothers or paternal half-brothers are included, but not maternal half-brothers. Rav Huna said that Rav said, coming near the end, in the case of a widow whose husband had died without children and who was waiting for her Yavam to perform Yibum or set her free with Chalitza, and then she died before her Yavam could take her in Yibum. So now the Yavam is permitted to marry her mother. Right? You can't marry a woman and her mother. So if you marry a woman, then even if she dies, you can never marry her mother. But since she came before him for Yibum, but then she died before he performed either Yibum or Chalitza, he never had a bond with her, and he is permitted to marry her mother. The Yibum obligation does not create a familial relation between them. Apparently, Rav Huna says that Rav holds that the Yibum bond, called Zika here, is not substantial. In other words, the bond formed between the Yavama and her Yavam, requiring Yibum, does not by itself create a halakhic connection between the two, so that if she dies before they perform either Yibum or Chalitza, it's like nothing ever happened, right? Because it's as if they had been killed at the same time, and the brother-in-law was never related to her as anything other than a brother-in-law, and so if he wanted to, he could marry that woman's mother to take, as his additional wife, and that would be permitted according to Rav. Not everyone's going to agree with this. The Gemara asks, well, then let him say explicitly the law is in accordance with the statement of the one who says that Yibum is not substantial, as this issue is in fact a matter of dispute between Tanaim. Why did he not simply conclude that the law is in accordance with the opinion of the Tana who held that the levirate bond is not substantial? And the Gemara answers, if he had said that, I would say this statement that the levirate bond is not substantial applies only in reference to two brothers, each of whom has the possibility to take her in Yibum. Right? So in a case where there were three brothers and one of them dies childless, and now there's a Yevama, and she stands for Yibum, it could go with either one of the surviving brothers. Either one of them could perform Yibum with her or Chalitza with her. And once one of those brothers has done that, she is prohibited to the remaining brother because she's, there's no Yibum situation anymore, and she was his brother's wife. So they're prohibited to each other. But which brother is going to perform the Yibum? Neither one is necessarily prioritized over the other. It doesn't go to the elder necessarily or the younger. So the bond is not so substantial since they're, one or the other brothers could fulfill the obligation. applies only in reference to two brothers, each of whom has the possibility to take her in levirate marriage. In such cases, the levirate bond between either one of the brothers and the Yevama is not absolute, as it is always possible for the other brother to marry her instead. But if there is only one brother, then since the obligation to the Yevama is exclusively his, then I would say that the levirate bond is substantial. He must perform either Yibum or Chalitza with her. Whereas if there were two brothers, neither one of the individual brothers is obligated that he must do either Yibum or Chalitza, because he could just sit back and let the other brother do it. The Gemara asks, then let him say, the law is in accordance with the statement of the one who says that the levirate bond is not substantial, even in the case of one brother. And the Gemara answers, if he had said that, I would say even if his Yevama were alive and required levirate marriage with him, he would be allowed to take her mother in marriage. Therefore, this comes to teach us that after death, yes, he is permitted to marry her mother. But while she is alive, no, he is not. Why not? This is because it is prohibited to nullify the mitzvah of levirate marriage. Were he to marry her mother, he would no longer be able to take the daughter in levirate marriage because his wife's daughter is forbidden to him. As a result of his marriage, he would cancel the mitzvah of levirate marriage so that it could no longer apply to him. And he can't do that as a strategy at the outset. I'm almost done here. Questions, get them in. The Gemara raises an objection to the statement of Rav Huna. We learned in the Mishna on page 49a of this tractate, if his Yevama dies, he is permitted to marry her sister. A precise reading of this phrase leads to the implication that with regard to her sister, yes, it is permitted, as even if it had been his wife who had died, he would be permitted to marry her sister. You can't marry sisters at the same time. You can't marry sisters if one of the sisters you divorced and she's still alive. But if your wife dies and you're a widower and then she had a sister, then it would be permitted to marry her. A brother cannot marry his brother's widow unless there's a Yibum situation. But a man may marry his wife's sister after his wife dies, only if his wife dies. Where am I? So with his sister, yes, it is permitted, as even if it had been his wife who died, he would be permitted to marry her sister. But with regard to her mother, no, not permitted. The Gemara rejects this line of reasoning. No evidence can be derived from here, as it is possible to say that the same is true even for her mother, that she too is permitted. But since it is taught in the first clause of this Mishnah, if his wife dies, he is permitted to take her sister, and there the language is precise and implies her sister yes, but her mother no, as she is forbidden by Torah law, because it is prohibited for a man to marry both a woman and her daughter, even after one of them dies. Therefore, he used the same language when he taught the latter clause of the same Mishnah, that he is permitted to take her sister. However, in the latter clause, it is not an exact reading, and in actuality, one is allowed to marry any of her relatives. And this completes the Gemara's explanation of Rav Huna's opinion. And we'll leave it there. So let's see if there's any questions on this. Simple stuff, right? Not confusing at all. Okay. On Yevamos 17, here on a Friday afternoon, as we await Shabbos bell. Perhaps I missed this, but is the qualification for the widow that the deceased husband had no children or no male children, since the interest is to carry on the deceased man's name? We're going to come to that question, I believe, later. So far, we've been saying he died with no children, right? No children. I think the sages are later going to ask, well, what if he had a girl, since you inherit through the men, so then he doesn't have an heir if he only has a daughter. So perhaps Yibum still applies because this man had no male children, but he did have a female child. But as somebody raised earlier, the fact that you have the daughters of Zelophehad, that in the absence of a male heir, the daughter does step in and inherit. I think there's also the issue of does the brother inherit? Does an uncle inherit over a daughter? We're not there yet. We're not there yet. But it's a very good question. Tom, if you weren't sure of your lineage, but wanted to be a qualified Jew, could you go through a formal conversion? So this is not relevant anymore, right? This is one of those issues that only existed in the ancient world. Right now, anyone who's converting to Judaism, we just assume that they are a Gentile. And we don't worry that mixed in among the Gentiles might be some people who actually are Jewish and don't know it, and that could create problems because they're a mamzer who not only doesn't require conversion because they're already a Jew, but cannot marry a Jewish person because they're a mamzer. But we just do away with that concern. As they mentioned yesterday, so the world has so many people in it that are not Jewish. Any particular non-Jew is just assumed to be a non-Jew going all the way back. And if they want to convert to Judaism, they are free to convert to Judaism. They don't have to do anything else. And then in terms of the Jews, we don't know, right? We don't know what our lineage is, and we don't worry about it. There's probably all kinds of flaws in everyone's lineage. I don't think anyone can trace their lineage all the way back to King David or something like that. There are some people that have an extraordinary lineage that maybe can go all the way back, but by far most people, they only go back 3, 4, 5 generations, and we have no reason to assume that there's a flaw in their lineage, like there was a mamzer in their lineage, or a divorcee who married a priest, and that their child is not a qualified Cohen. I don't think we worry about that, right? I mean, right now there's no temple to serve in, and that's why these issues are somewhat academic. But the Kohanim do bless the congregation on holidays, and I guess if they know with certainty that Cohen married a divorced woman, and then had a child and had a son, and then I think that son is not supposed to go up and bless the congregation. But I haven't looked this up recently, and I'm not a rabbi, and I'm not sure. Right, so that's a question of first impression with me right now. That would require further research. And Tom, what if a man married, had a child, and then died? So he did not die childless, but then the child dies. Is his brother obligated to marry the widow in order to carry on the dead man's lineage? That's a really good question, because if it's all about inheritance, it would seem that this man doesn't have an heir now, and so perhaps Yibum applies. But it does not, right? The man brought a child into the world, and then for whatever reason, God decided that he would not have an heir, and Yibum is not, I'm almost 100% sure that the fact that he had a child and then the child dies does not reinstate that we will override the prohibition against a brother's wife to perform Yibum, because this man had a child. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the fact that the child died before he did, right? Because it's probably going to be different. Perhaps if he has no children at the time that he dies, maybe Yibum kicks back in. I bet we're going to encounter that question. I kind of a dim recollection that we will encounter that question at some point. We're just not there yet. But I'm pretty sure that if you ever had children, Yibum doesn't apply. Now, remember that in modern times, we don't perform Yibum at all. So really what we're asking is, do they have to perform Chalitza before the widow and the brother-in-law are free to marry other people? And finally, Rochelle, and that is why my daughter is named Tirza. She was a daughter of Zelophehad, one of the 5 daughters, one of the first women to stand up for her rights in the Torah. And may Tirza live to 120 and enjoy chuppah, Torah, and masim tovim, and bring you much nachas. Rochelle, and may you bring her much nachas. Okay, my friends, that's what we've got today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Motzi Shabbos, for page 18. We're still running a page behind. I was looking ahead, and I think it's actually like around 23 where there's 2 short pages in a row, and maybe that'll be the chance to catch up. Okay, everybody, good Shabbos.